two brothers once owned 1/3 of all the silver on Earth. Not a silver mine, not a fund, not a futures contract on paper. Physical bars, stacked in Swiss vaults, London warehouses, and Texas airplane hangars. Enough silver to mint every coin in America twice over and still have some left for the cutlery. And on a single Thursday in March 1980, they lost $1.7 billion in one afternoon. Not because the market outsmarted them, because the government changed the rules while they were winning. To understand what happened, you need to understand who these men were. Nelson Bunker Hunt and William Herbert Hunt were the sons of H.L. Hunt, a Texas oil wildcatter who started with a $100 poker win and died worth $2 billion, making him arguably the richest man in America. H.L. was the kind of man who packed his own paper bag lunch every single day, even after he could afford to buy the restaurant. His sons did not inherit his restraint. Bunker and Herbert grew up inside obscene wealth, but were haunted by a single fear, that it could disappear, not through bad bets, through something they couldn't control. Inflation, government seizure, the slow collapse of paper money itself. This wasn't paranoia. For the Hunt family, it was theology. Then, on August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon walked onto national television and confirmed everything they'd ever feared. Nixon told the world the United States was ending the gold standard, effective immediately. The dollar was no longer backed by gold, it was backed by trust in the United States government. From that night forward, every currency on Earth was floating, untethered, just vibes and faith in men in suits. For most Americans, this was a Sunday evening news story. For Bunker Hunt, it was a 5-alarm fire. Herbert, you watching this? I'm watching. The dollar is paper. It was always paper. No, before paper meant gold. Now paper means paper. You understand the difference? So what do? We find something real. They looked at gold first, but the U.S. government had made it illegal for citizens to hold gold bullion since FDR's 1933 confiscation, a restriction that wouldn't lift until 1975. So the Hunt brothers looked for the next best thing: silver. In 1973, silver was trading roughly $1.95 an ounce. Bunker started buying, quietly at first, 200,000 ounces here, 500,000 there. By 1974, he had accumulated 55 million ounces. That's roughly 1,700 tons of silver, heavier than 3 Statues of Liberty, and approximately nobody noticed. But here is the detail that separates a rich man buying silver from what the Hunts were actually doing. Bunker didn't want paper claims on silver. He didn't want receipts or derivative positions. He wanted the physical bars. He didn't trust American institutions enough to leave them there. He chartered cargo planes to fly the silver to Switzerland. Sir, we've loaded the last pallet. How many bars this flight? 40,000. And the Swiss vault is confirmed secure? Confirmed. They asked if we'd be returning. Tell them yes. Tell them to build us a bigger room. When word leaked, and it always leaks, the silver market barely twitched because no one believed what they were actually doing. Rich Texas eccentrics, people said. A hobby, nothing to worry about. They were extremely wrong. By 1979, the operation had gone multinational. Bunker and Herbert Hunt partnered with a group of wealthy Saudi investors, including a businessman named Mahmoud Fustak, and formed a secret entity called the International Metals Investment Company. By late 1979, the Hunt Consortium controlled roughly 100 million ounces of physical silver, and futures contracts representing another 150 million ounces. Combined position, 250 million ounces. The entire world's known above-ground silver supply outside of government stockpiles was approximately 550 million ounces. They owned nearly half of all the silver that existed. The price reacted the way any commodity would react when it discovers it's almost cornered. In January 1979, silver traded at $6 an ounce. By September, $16. By December, $30. By January 18, 1980, silver hit $50 an ounce, an 800% increase in 12 months. Bunker Hunt's net worth on paper had grown by over $3 billion in under a year. A reporter asked him how it felt to be so wealthy. His answer was pure Texas. $1 billion ain't what it used to be. He wasn't joking. The Hunts had a massive blind spot. They could see the silver market, they could model inflation, they could track every move their competitors were making in the open market. What they couldn't see was the conversation happening behind closed doors at the exchange and inside the Federal Reserve. The rules of the game were being quietly rewritten, and they had absolutely no idea. While the Hunts were moving silver bars across the Atlantic, the people who ran the New York Silver Exchange were watching the price chart with mounting dread. The COMEX, the commodity exchange, was where silver futures were traded, and the COMEX had a problem. For every futures contract the Hunts held, someone on the other side had promised to eventually deliver silver at prices they'd never imagined when they made the deal. As the price rocketed from $6 to $50, the losses for those short sellers, mostly large banks and established dealers, were becoming catastrophic. This is where the story stops being about greed and becomes something more uncomfortable. On January 7, 1980, the COMEX board held an emergency session. The Hunt position is cornering this market. Is it illegal? Not technically. Then what are we doing in this room? We're changing the rules. Can we do that? We're the exchange. We write the rules. They called it Silver Rule 7. Effective immediately, no new long positions in silver futures could be opened on the COMEX. Traders could only liquidate. You could sell silver, you could not buy it. This was, to put it gently, a rule designed with a single specific family's destruction in mind. The Hunts received no warning, no phone call, no meeting, just a new rule on the board and a market that had just been structurally turned against them by decree. The price of silver began to fall. Bunker wasn't immediately alarmed. He had physical silver, real bars. Rules on a futures exchange didn't change the fact that he owned the actual metal. So he doubled down. He borrowed against his silver holdings to buy more. His margin exposure, the amount he personally owed if prices continued falling, grew to approximately $1.3 billion. Then Paul Volcker entered the room. The Federal Reserve Chairman was already fighting a war against inflation, having raised interest rates to a punishing 20%. He watched the silver market with the expression of a man who has just found a wasp nest in his office wall. The last thing a central banker waging war on inflation needs is two Texas brothers cornering a commodity, sending prices vertical and proving to the entire country that paper money was worthless. Paul Volcker made calls to the major banks. The message was short and unambiguous. Stop lending to the Hunts. Every door in American banking quietly closed. The Hunts received a margin call from their broker, Bash Halsey Stewart Shields. They owed $135 million by end of day. Their billions were locked in silver bars sitting in Swiss vaults and airplane hangars in Texas. They scrambled to raise liquid cash. Every bank said no. That morning, silver opened at $15.80 an ounce, down from a high of $50 just weeks before. By afternoon, it was $10. Bash Halsey Stewart Shields was itself teetering on collapse. 9 other major broker-dealers were wobbling. The contagion was spreading fast enough that Federal Reserve officials spent the entire day on the phone coordinating an emergency intervention. A consortium of banks finally agreed to extend the Hunts a $1.1 billion emergency loan, but only in exchange for pledging their silver, their oil interests, and most of their family assets. In approximately 60 days, the two men who had owned nearly half of the world's silver were technically left with almost nothing. The legal fallout took a decade. The FTC investigated. Traders who had sold silver to the Hunts at peak prices sued for market manipulation. In 1988, a civil jury found them liable and awarded $134 million in damages, tripled under antitrust law to over $400 million. Later that same year, Nelson Bunker Hunt filed for personal bankruptcy. Assets, $1.5 billion in debts. Cash on hand, negligible. He sold the racehorses, then the art, then the properties, then the oil fields. Was it market manipulation on the Hunts' part? The court said yes. Was the COMEX's emergency rule change designed to protect a cartel of institutional short sellers at the expense of one family that had simply played the game more aggressively than anyone expected? The truth, as it is always when this much money is involved, is that the rules of a market are written by the people who benefit most from those rules, and when a player grows large enough to threaten the writers rewrite. Bunker Hunt spent his final years as a minor legend in oil country, occasionally sought out by journalists, still convinced the fundamental thesis had been correct. The price went to $50, he reportedly said years later. The fundamentals were right. I just couldn't survive long enough for the people making the rules to let me prove it. He had the right idea, the right asset, and enough money to move a market. What he didn't have was the one thing no amount of silver can buy: the ability to still be in the game when the people who write the rules decide to write them in your favor.